Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth and final day of Water and Beyond, EU Transformative Approaches for International Partnerships. I just want to mention before we get started, and this is our final day, we're going to be looking ahead. Where do we go from here? We're going to be talking about water as a right, as a human right. And that's a very interesting concept. And how do you justify that from a financial and economic and social basis? Very, very important that the world recognized water as a human right, a right to water, a decade ago. Where do we stand now? How much further? That glass half full, half empty. Where do we go? But before that, I just want to mention one little anecdote. My first experience, my first exposure to water and beyond, because it's water linked to everything, was in Somalia in the 1990s when there was the famine there, aggravated by the conflict of the warlords. I saw plenty of it. We got shot at, and we saw how we managed to save a lot of lives, hundreds of thousands, after about 250,000 people perished. But the idea that we need to develop water as a key to everything else, and that is one objective. A very prime objective of this event over 4 days is to raise the profile of water. And it's tricky because you need to justify that in terms of investment. We talk with policymakers today, with NGOs, with the private sector. How do we look back at these past 3 days and today and go forward? Where do we go from here? And we're starting there with which region do you work in? Slido.com with the code WAB2021, or you've got the QR code there on your screen. And so far, 100% from Europe, but over the last 3 days, we have been seeing people from North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East, I believe Central Asia as well, and others. So that's all about building the partnerships and for everyone to be involved. Here we go. Sub-Saharan Africa, 50-50. As it develops there. And as we're looking at that, I'm going to present you the moderator for this next panel. And this panel is Section 7, Water as a Human Right, Working Towards Implementation with All Partners. This is related to Pillar 5 of the European Commission's International Partnership Priority on Governance, Peace, and Security. And moderating this, again, because Lesha, you've been very, very busy over the last couple of days. Lesha Witmer, Steering Committee of Women for Water Partnership. And Lesha, you can take it from here, I guess, right?
Thank you very much, Chris. Good morning again to everybody. The Slido little poll will stay open a little bit longer, but not that much. So if you want to put in there, and I know there's some of you want to give multiple answers, which doesn't seem to work, so do the one where you work most. Just to quickly introduce this session, if you look at the original title, you will see it says Water and Governance, and then the implementation of the human right to water and sanitation. Now, what is it if we say governance? A lot of people then hear government, but that's not the same thing. So governance is about institutions, about laws and regulations in place, about enough resources, about information sharing, about stakeholder involvement. All these elements make up good governance. Our colleagues earlier this week have talked about the governance around water resource management and transboundary cooperation. So we will not be addressing that part today. If you still are interested, I'm sure at the end of this session, one of our esteemed colleagues in Brussels can make sure that you get the link to those sessions or the background material. We will focus today mainly on the human right to water and sanitation and its implementation. And that's not an easy topic. So we're extremely happy to have, let's say, the ultimate expert with us, Pedro Arrojo, And Pedro, welcome to our community. You have recently been appointed as the new Special Rapporteur. It is an honor to have us with you, you with us. And we hope we can, first of all, give us some insights on how you want to handle things, what you focus on. I know you're very passionate on some of the elements on the human rights to water and what that means. So after I've said that my esteemed colleague, Sophie Ojadjan from WaterAid, is also helping to organize this session, and you will see her by the end of this session. So having said that, I would like to pull up the other poll, please. The word cloud. Yes. And you have to go to Slido to be able to answer. And while you're doing that, I'm slowly going to give the floor to Pedro Arrojo. And yeah, and we'll come back to the polls later on. They will stay open. Okay, having said that, Pedro, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much, Lesha. The honor is my honor, really. Let me summarize in so short time some of my convictions and concerns and explain what I want to do along my first year of mandate. Well, I have two, and I want to present two thematic reports. The first will be on the plan that I intend to develop, but previously analyzing the current context, a context presided over by a global crisis as serious as it is paradoxical. The global water crisis on the water planet, I used to say, the blue planet, with 2.2 billion people without guaranteed access to safe drinking water. So from my point of view, this crisis has roots, on the confluence of three major failures, global failures. The unsustainability of our aquatic ecosystems that we have transformed. We have in fact transformed water, the blue soul of life that we know, into the most devastating vector of death and disease ever known. The second is the failure of inequity and injustice from deeply immoral socioeconomic systems in general. Consistently with this, we are talking about 2 billion of impoverished people living beside a polluted river. In front of this, finally, we have a serious failure, from my point of view, in the democratic governance of water generated by the pressures of financialization of life. It is argued to us the need to assume water as a simple economic good, useful and scarce, and to manage it from the logic of the market. But this means transforming citizens into simple clients, and those 2.2 billion people into even more vulnerable poor clients. This is a very, we have to take care about this. In this framework, I will analyze in my report the impact of climate change and of the pandemic, which accelerate and deepen this global crisis, opening from my point of view a change of era, historic change of era. Well, the second thematic report, which I will present to the UN General Assembly in New York, will focus on the risks and impacts of water commodification. I confess really my deep concerns after knowing that water begin to trade in the futures markets of Wall Street. Without any doubt, the space most prone to large speculative operations, as has been demonstrated in the food market, seriously affecting human rights at stake, from my point of view. The human rights to water and sanitation face, as its very nature, a democratic challenge in the face of poverty, inequality, and unsustainability. Therefore, we must develop an approach based on human rights and environmental sustainability, and not so much on business logic, is my point of view. Business and market will have their space, of course, but I insist, the very nature of the challenge of democracy is democracy and sustainability in the face of this historical change of era that I talked before. Regarding the roundtable, there are three important issues to consider from my point of view also. The challenge that the EU assumed with respect to human rights after receiving the citizens' initiative Right to Water. The second one, the municipal funding for wash services in the context of the new Green Deal European. And finally, the role of Europe worldwide regarding this human rights and climate change together, from my point of view also. The Right to Water initiative presented almost 2 million signatures in Brussels in 2013, demanding that the EU assume the human right to water approved years before in the United Nations. The Commission promised, in fact, to give a specific treatment to this sensitive issue and to take into account the demands of the initiative. Today, effectively, the reform of the Drinking Water Directive is already approved. And although the broad social movement that promoted the right to water insists that its demands have not been fully met, without a doubt, the amended directive improves on previous legislation from a human rights perspectives. So a question, we need to ask ourselves and to ask the European countries, are they ready to develop and even improve the new Drinking Water Directive in national transposition processes, assuming in an effective manner the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation? Well, focusing on municipalities, public health system and funding, the harsh experience we are living with the pandemic has generated a general consensus on the need to strengthen our public health systems. And there is a growing prestige on these systems as collective democratic efforts without profit making and operating on the principle of leaving no one behind, in line with the human rights-based approach advocated by the United Nations. Meanwhile, models that only guarantee health to those who can afford are suffering a strong loss of prestige. So another question, why not assuming for the water and sanitation services a similar approach to the one we are in fact assuming regarding the public health systems? On this occasion, unlike the crisis of 2008, fortunately, from my point of view, the approach to getting out of the crisis has changed radically. With the austerity strategies, there were no public funds. But today, the challenge of facing the pandemic and relaunching the European economy and social cohesion with the new Green Deal mobilizes huge public funds. So another question, are we aware of the importance of strengthening the financial capacities of municipalities to fulfill their competences, ending to the financial anorexia that was imposed on them with the austerity measures, and taking into account that water, as I said, and sanitation services are the very foundation of the public health systems. From my point of view, the main social impacts of climate change are linked to the water vector. And therefore, the hydrological transition should be a key axis of adaptation strategies, in the same way that energy transition presides over mitigation strategies. This, finally, is why the Climate Adaptation Summit scheduled next week, I think, can be crucial in order to enrich the European Union's adaptation strategy to be presented in 1 month. And I hope it will link to the human rights to water and sanitation as the core of this strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pedro. You made it very interesting, I think, for all of us, because apart from giving your opinion, you also asked, I think, a couple of very crucial questions for all of us to think about. Let me give you one more question before we go to the next speaker. And that is, since we have so many people from the EU missions and the European Commission online, how do you envision to working with them to further the agenda on the human rights of water and sanitation?
Well, of course, it's a very complex question. It's not enough to have funds and to prioritize these funds in some way for the main critical issues, as for instance, the relevance of water and sanitation with respect to public health, as I said. But I think it's very, very important to reinforce the municipal and community approach in the plans for collaborating with other countries and with the most vulnerable people. I think we are before a democratic, mainly a democratic issue, a democratic challenge, and is crucial to assure, to be sure that the transparency and public participation, citizens' participation of the most vulnerable people, gender mainstream approach. These kind of things must be in the center, in the central axis of these policies, this cooperation, partnership, cooperation around the challenge of the human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation.
Okay. Since you managed to basically say all the elements that play a role in implementing the human rights to water and sanitation, could I ask you one last question? And it's probably also going to introduce our next speaker. Did you have the chance, I mean, I know you have not been in the office very long yet, to look at the EU guidelines for implementation of the human right to water that were published in 2019?
Well, I am at present, I confess, absolutely overwhelmed with meetings, with new people to know, with new institutions, with documents to read and to study. So I know, but I think it's important to reinforce more than what the United Nations want to do, is to reinforce what the United Nations can do. Because in this sense, we have created United Nations. We create the Human Rights Council as a very powerful, politically, morally, very powerful institutions, but without the means and the capacities in order to accomplish even the agreements we agree at a worldwide level. No? So for me, we need to reinforce in this opening new era that I am sure we are opening. We need to reinforce global governance, democratic global governance, giving capacities to the United Nations, and not just economic capacities, but also legal, the capacity of enforcing the agreements we do in the United Nations. And in this sense, with human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, of course, in the same way.
Thank you. Thank you very much for all this food for thought. And having that said that, I would like to point out to everybody who is interested that, and I know that the technical team will pull up the link. If you want to know more background of all our speakers, there is a link to their biographies, and you can find them on the website of the conference. and a direct link will appear in your chat box. The first speaker I would like to introduce is Luisa Ragher. She is currently the head of Human Rights Division of the European External Action Service. And that's a long title, and maybe not everybody knows what that means. So if they don't have the knowledge, I usually say this is the Foreign Office of the EU. And I know that's not completely correct, but just to explain a little bit. And I know that EEAS and your colleagues have done a lot of work to see about good water policies, and in this context also the EU guidelines on the human rights to water and sanitation. So I'm extremely pleased that you found the time to be with us, and I'm very happy to give you the floor, especially if you can, because we already got that question. How can we implement, how can the EU help to implement these set of guidelines and also some of the issues that Pedro Arrojo just mentioned? The floor is yours, Luisa.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lesha. Let me start by showing these are the guidelines. And this is a political document that, as Lesha said, we adopted in summer 2019. When I say we, it is adopted at the level of foreign ministers. What the guidelines do, the guidelines implement the European Union policy on human rights on specific issues. In this case, I'm quite pleased to say that the first set of guidelines on economic and social rights has been on safe drinking water and sanitation. And for now, the only set of guidelines that we have on economic and social rights. We will develop further. What we do with these guidelines, first of all, we reaffirm the EU's commitment to realize the rights to safe drinking water and sanitation worldwide. And by doing that, of course, also to progressively pursue the realization of SDG 6. The most important elements, I would hope that people participating in this conference have or will have a look at these guidelines. But the most important elements in these guidelines and the most topical these days is really the underlining the fact that access to safe drinking water and sanitation has to be guaranteed in a non-discriminatory way, and the principle of equality has to prevail. So everyone, without discrimination, have to have access to sufficient, safe, acceptable, physically accessible, and affordable water. And human rights to sanitation is an entitlement for everybody. And why do I say that this is particularly important now? As Pedro just mentioned, 2.2 billion of people still lack safe access to water. 1 in 4 healthcare facilities lack basic water services. 1 in 5 have no sanitation services. And then if we look at the least developed countries, 3/4 of the population in least developed countries lack hand washing facilities. So if we look at the situation of the crisis we are in now with the COVID, this is a need that comes at the forefront of our foreign policy activities. The other important element in these guidelines is the focus on the human rights defenders, and in particular, the human rights defenders working on the protection of environment. Those that are out there to protect their rights, the right of in their communities, but also at global level. And we stand behind human rights defenders, and we highlight that in these guidelines. Now, what concretely we do with these guidelines? With these guidelines, we first raise the importance of the issue at political level. Second, we give the instruction, or we ask our colleagues on the ground, so our ambassadors in 140 countries, EU ambassadors, as well as member states, to pursue these policies. So this is a document that is directed to all stakeholders, but is particularly directed to our people on the ground, EU officials, as well as member states diplomats, to pursue this policy in partnership with the partner countries. An additional element that I would like to bring in, as we were talking about the COVID, and Pedro was also referring to the COVID, where water and sanitation comes at the forefront of the policy issues that we need to address. In the framework of our Team Europe approach, which is the approach of the European Union together with the member states to pursue policy in addressing the COVID crisis, the most important issues that have been put at the forefront of the activities are three. One of the three is strengthening health, water, and sanitation system. That together with responding to the immediate health crisis and mitigating the social economic impacts. So one of the three priorities is strengthening health, water, and sanitation systems. And when I say priorities, of course, that is then reflected in the way also the funds are channeled. So what we can do, which was, Lesha, your question, is twofold. First, on the political front, we can engage with partner countries bilaterally, and we do that in dialogues with partner countries. Asking them to accede to multilateral international convention, supporting partner countries with exchange of best practices, as I already said, with supporting human rights defenders, operating in the partner country and working on environment. And we can do policy support through the multilateral framework. At multilateral level, the European Union is supporting resolutions both in Geneva and New York, and supports mandate of the Special Rapporteur. But we can, of course, also support at a more technical level through expertise and to project. So this is the more concrete and more visible way of support, but is not the only. That has to be seen together with the political support. And then, if you wish, I see that my time is running out. But if you wish, I can complement later on in the discussions.
Okay, thank you very much, Luisa. And I think it's very important to mention that all your colleagues in the missions, together with INPA and others, are starting their programming cycle for this whole period, and that making sure that this issue is in that new program to be agreed with the member states is very important. Thank you so much for that. And I quickly go to Ethiopia, where a colleague from WaterAid, Tseguereda Abraham, will talk a little bit more about what happens on the ground and how other issues like nutrition, like food safety, climate change interfere with that. So, Tseguereda, the floor is yours, and please stay within the time of 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lesha. Thank you for having me to be able to share WaterAid experience in Ethiopia. So I will be speaking about how we look at the two lenses we look at this. On one hand, the human rights approach to water and the system strengthening approach. In our context, we focus on influencing sector policy, institutions, and systems that are better able to respond to sector challenges and ensure good governance and sustainable services. So as part of our system strengthening approach, we look at the system-wide approach, which is essential to address and achieve the SDGs. We understand that the water system to be all the people, the behaviors, the policies, the processes, the resources, and even the interactions and institutions necessary to deliver inclusive wash. So as part of our system strengthening approach, we address interlinked, what we call building blocks. These are different part of the system that we address and support. It includes sector coordination, strategic planning, financing, institutional arrangement, accountability, and monitoring. So throughout our work in Ethiopia and in other countries in WaterAid, we have been able to, through this approach of system strengthening, we have been able to have local government capacity to respond increased. Their ability to monitor, correct paths has been improved as a result of this approach. So on the other hand, WaterAid also works with local government to set up district level social accountability platforms. So this is where we bring the demand side of the demand side, the response, and these are open spaces for community feedback on the services. So the attempt is to build a shared sense of responsibility from local government side by engaging local government and utilities staff to have applied approaches and materials. So we have developed together with other partners the Making Rights Real project. So it's making the human rights approach practical at the ground level and take it from a very theoretical to a very practical level. So the materials we use can be shared, of course, and we used it to improve local government responsiveness to citizens' demands. So what we did is support them in identifying different stages in planning, problem solving, but also to draw on their personal motivation. Motivation was really critical. In many of accountability projects that we have, the demand comes from communities, but there is no motivation to respond, and there is it's very difficult to follow up on governments responding to these issues, to the services, to the quality and performance, to a very weak quality and performance of wash services. So in terms of personal motivation and perceived benefits, we have looked at different aspects. So for instance, being a hero by reaching everyone and even the hardest to reach, showing progress. Some are motivated by developing better relationships, especially with communities, improving coordination. So the Making Rights Real tool facilitated from our side constructive and continuous dialogue with government about human rights principles without being divisive or confrontational. So as I discussed, we invested on system strengthening on one hand, and on the other hand, we made human rights approaches very practical for local government. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think you just also gave reactions to the earlier questions from Pedro Arrojo about the involvement of local government and municipalities. So I think what you're presenting might be a very good learning experience for others. And I'll come back to you maybe later on with another follow-up question. Having said that, I would like to answer two questions I saw in the chat. One is, yes, this session is recorded. If you don't want to be recorded, then you need to leave the session. Secondly, the organizers will come back to you about the availability of those recordings later on, and also on the availability of the presentations. And thirdly, some of the questions we're following them closely. We will come back to after all the panel presentations. So thank you. And having said that, I'm going to our next esteemed speaker, Mariet Verhoef. She is the president of Women for Water Partnership. The partnership has its offices in the Netherlands, but works globally. That was one of the answers we couldn't give in the first poll. I think, Mariet, you're going to take a somewhat other angle, but especially looking at stakeholder involvement, and especially of women and maybe also young women, and partly answering one of the guidelines in the EEAS guidelines, because there it says gender mainstreaming. Now, what does that mean in practice? Mariet, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lesha. Well, I can tell you that ever since the Dublin Principles in 1992, all stakeholders agree that water is essential for human survival and dignity, and that women play a key role. The basis for the SDGs of the Agenda 2030 is built on human rights principles, and Women for Water focuses on Water for All 6 and SDG 5, gender equality. The EU Gender Action Plan shows innovative plans, and this conference, Water and Beyond, will surely realize transboundary cooperation, build broader partnerships, create water investment for the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. But please do not forget to involve women. Maybe you can set quotas to get equal representation. It is clear that SDG 6 and especially the targets on drinking water and sanitation are not on track. This means that also SDG 5 is not on track. The SDGs 4, 5, 6 need to be connected in the planning and discussions with the national governments and the international partnerships. The EU Commission can assist. Besides, they can ensure horizontal coordination between the DGs. Women for Water would like to highlight the inclusion of women in the whole process. We all can achieve better performances and more promising results when involving women and paying attention to gender issues, also for reasons such as equality, human rights, fairness, and justice. Only targeting at women is not enough, and mainstreaming alone does not work. To see women as experts requires a different lens and specific action to include women in all phases of a program cycle. There is a huge gap between policies and practice, between practicing and preaching. The international partnerships could bridge this gap by prioritizing and approving strategies that involve and include women on equal footing with men. When addressing governance and leadership, it is imperative that women are included in decision-making processes and in all phases of the program cycle. When tackling resources, policies supporting equal access to land, water, finance, and other productive resources need to be implemented. The EC could consider how to ensure that direct financing will reach local, national, and international women organizations in the methods used when discussing national plans. And when dealing with data, also collect sex disaggregated data for monitoring, learning, and planning, and ensure these data show up in reporting. Capacity development and vocational training is crucial to enable women and girls to fully participate. And when these strategies are translated into regulations and guidelines, they need to be implemented, enforced, and operationalized at the level of the appropriate authorities. I thank you, and I'm looking forward to our discussion later.
Thank you very much, Mariet. That was a whole list of things to think about and maybe hopefully implement in the new programming and the new strategies. And I will probably come back to you again also a little bit later. To make sure that we're getting gender balanced again, I'm going to invite the second gentleman on this panel. He is based in the UK. He is heading up Aquafed, which is an umbrella organization that combines loads and loads of private operators, private utilities, not just in Europe, but also across the globe. And I would say you have a large presence also in Africa. And of course, the question everybody is going to ask, so I'm going to ask it to you as well. What the hell are private operators doing with the human right to water and sanitation?
Thanks, everyone. Hope you're all okay. Yeah, so I'm calling in from this little island adrift in the Atlantic called England. Welcome from here. Okay, so just a bit of history first of all. So Aquafed, yes, is the Private Operators Association, members all over the world, big and small, big international corporates, but also very small family businesses serving sometimes a town of 1,000 people. So it really, really ranges. Aquafed's been always a supporter of the human right to water and sanitation. We were an early promoter for it, so we fully believe in it, and we have for them from the start. Just some context as well. Private operators, I know sometimes people get very upset and very worried about it, and there's loads of them. We actually only serve about 10% of the world's population. Okay, so that puts it in context for you. And there's a lot of attention on us sometimes, but it's only 10%. Number of PPPs has remained stable. Globally, I know there's been a bit of an expansion in Asia over the last 10 years, but generally it's stayed quite stable. And I'm talking about licensed and regulated private operators. They are the people that I represent, not the kind of what in some cases the thieves and the scoundrels that charge 50, 100 times the price for water. I'm not representing those. Now, to answer Lesha's question, what the hell does private operators, what have we got to do with the human right? Well, all our contracts are directly associated with the human rights parameters. You bring a private operator in, usually to expand the network, to increase access. You get them in to improve the availability, to improve the quality. So we are directly contracted to maintain or improve one or more of the parameters of the human right. So it's as simple as that. And it's under the control and under direction of public authorities and municipalities. Our operators are not brought in and let to do what they want. It is under strict contract and strict criteria. Okay, so again, people say sometimes, oh, we're losing control of our water's been taken away. It hasn't. Public authorities are in control. They must always remain in control, and it's their job to, ultimately the buck stops with them. Okay. Just in terms of other ways, it's not just public-private partnerships, but we also help in kind of technical assistance and operator partnerships as well, because it's not, a PPP is not always the best solution. And let me be clear on that. It's not always the best solution, and sometimes public or operator will be doing a perfectly good job. Don't need us. But sometimes there'll be little aspects of their performance or little aspects of their service that we can come and help and improve it, and that's what happens. Now, I wanted to turn quickly to the human rights principles, and because a couple have been mentioned this week. One of them is, as we know, equality and non-discrimination and participation. Annalise Avril, my colleague from Suez, was in the opening session a few days ago, and she talked about how the operators, what we try and do is upskill and build local capacity. And I think this is really important, and I still feel that this is not happening, and this must be a greater priority for the EU. She gave two examples of working with local universities on a Senegal contract and an India contract, and using the local skills base and knowledge. And Annalise was saying, we know some things at Suez, but we don't know everything. And that's absolutely correct. And with these contracts as well, there was a huge element of involving the local communities and stakeholder engagement. And people talk about this, but they're not actually doing it. And I think that donor money from the EU or anywhere else has to really test itself and say, look, are we really skilling and building local capacity? Because if you don't, water and sanitation, it remains with a charity mindset, and we're always handing out. And we almost have this approach in Europe whereby we give. We have to help people in the developing countries stand up on their own 2 feet, not see them as a charity anymore, but see them as a much more, put them on a much more sustainable footing, right? Because then we avoid criticisms of things like, kind of modern day colonialism. And I think there's actually something in that. Our mindset has to change. Now, that's a personal view more than Aquafed's, but that's my strong held view. Okay, so we have to get out of this charity mindset. For example, if we are giving money to build a borehole in a water stressed zone, is that really a good idea when there's no water there anyway? Shouldn't we be thinking about water reuse, and again enabling these local communities to stand up for themselves and use kind of sometimes quite simple technology to help that work? Another another principle is access to information and transparency. Now, private operators, I would maintain, are subject to much more accountability and transparency than other types of operators. We're bound to KPIs, sometimes ranging from 40 to 300. Okay, so transparency, we're used to it. I think Pedro mentioned Mr. Arrojo mentioned the Drinking Water Directive revision. Yes, you know, that has pushed transparency to some extent, but it didn't go far enough. And I think we shouldn't pat ourselves on the back too much in Europe. You know, Aquafed, for example, we proposed to decision makers a basket of indicators that would demonstrate the human right to water was actually being delivered, and that wasn't followed through. And some governments rejected it, and they didn't want that extra level of accountability. Okay, so I think that it was a good start, but a lot more could have been done, and Europe needs to set the example on transparency. So I think overall, like I said, private operators, PPP is not a solution. Lesha, am I running out of time?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. But, you know, I think ultimately what private sector are doing, what are we doing here? The answer is we are delivering the human right every day.
Okay, thank you very much, Neil. I think you covered some of the questions we saw passing by already earlier. I would like to go back to the first poll, if I can see it myself, to be honest, because we just closed it. Let me see what happens here. Yes, thank you very much. This is a cloud poll, and what you see is, well, thank you very much, because this is the session about it. Governance and poor governance, yes, absolutely, play a big role. People are also stressing the fact that we need long-term views, partnerships, and I think the message there is also knowledge sharing. And something that came up earlier in other sessions as well is the problem with fragmented governance, so that some of the tasks are divided so much that people are not talking to each other and the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And of course, the funding issue comes up. But I think the main ones here are the SDG silos. That's, I think, is also what Mariet was mentioning, that if you make plans, you also have to look at the connective SDG targets and make sure they don't contradict each other, but help each other. And that access to water and sanitation, and I would add to information, is quite essential. So thank you for that, all of you. And it certainly will come back in the conclusions from my colleague later on. We'll go back to some of the questions that came up. And Neil, just to go in the reverse, we got quite a few remarks on what do you call that? On the pricing and affordability. And can I please also ask the audience to put your questions in the Q&A, because otherwise it's going to be very difficult for us to follow. So Neil, pricing, tariff setting, affordability, how does that play a role? Floor is yours.
It's huge. I mean, look, with pricing decisions and tariff decisions, they are taken by the municipality. Again, private operators must not and cannot set the tariffs, cannot set the fine. They don't. Okay, this is a public authority. It's a municipality decision. What does not happen, and we all know because we all talk about it, is that local people or the users of the tariff, they are not consulted. They're not engaged, and this has been talked about for years and years and years. So this is we just go on, and I bet, Lesha, when by the time I'm grey and I've got no hair left, we'll be on a conference talking about tariff policy. There's enough expertise out there already, and it's just a case of someone now, EU, needs to get hold of this issue and start helping municipalities across the world deal with this issue correctly. There's no other thing about it. It's there. All the advice and information and expertise is there already. We just need to start using it.
Okay, I still think if somebody wants to look it up, one of the most interesting examples is the whole process of tariff and price setting that the Scottish government went through 2 or 3 years ago, and I think that's a unique process.
May I interrupt you and say, yes, I mean, the Scottish government and the English one as well, because it's all private companies. So what happens in England is that the water companies, before they have their plans approved by the regulator, they have to consult their users, their customers, and they have to show that they have consulted widely and gathered a huge amount of support before their investment plans and their pricing plans are agreed by the regulator. And that's something that I think works very well and other countries can look at.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Mariet, I already saw you popping up, and actually my next question is for you. We got a few remarks that, what about the men? You were talking about giving the women the expert role. Some men might not agree with that or not even aware that they could. So what does that mean in terms of actions, in terms of strategy?
Well, I totally agree that we have to do it together. I mean, as we said, I said once before, change is a chorus and not a solo. So we have to work with the men and we have to involve them, and they have to support us. And supporting not only women in general, but supporting everyone. From it's in a way the same thing with the tariffs that we are just talking about. Starting from the grassroots, starting from the bottom up to support women with capacity building, and of course EC bigger organizations can do this to get everyone involved. So the other thing is probably one of the biggest issues for women is that there is no direct financing, and so how can you put yourself forward in a function if you can't really get projects and get things on paper and prioritized, because everything that women do, a lot of the women anyway, is voluntary work. And I think that is often forgotten, that that they have to be paid to really be, and also involve the youth, the young water professionals, the young professionals in general. I don't think that all of them realize how much was done up to now by women voluntary, while in a way they do not participate in paid jobs, or they don't participate in the decision making, only because of this lack of money and everything. So I think that there is still a lot that can be done, like setting quotas to get equal representation, that we can change this.
Okay.
And I think the men have to help us do that.
Thank you, Mariet. Clear messages. Luisa, if I can ask you for a question, comment. I hope you're still there. Yes. Luisa, I think we got two important remarks also from other panelists, but also in the Q&A. One of them was a remark, I think, both by Pedro Arrojo and by Neil Dhot, that unfortunately the human rights elements, the equality elements, seem to be lacking in the way that projects are being designed and projects are being monitored. And we were wondering if you know, in the discussions for new programming, maybe it was possible to bring in a little bit more on that. And I think the second question for you also is the monitoring in general. Is that part of your guidelines, and how would you envision that to happen? Thank you.
Let me start with the second one. When we publish guidelines, we also make sure that the guidelines are implemented. And I know that what everybody is looking at is not a piece of paper, political paper that we produce, but you are all looking at the results that brings, and so are we. So what we want to see is how our policy documents is translated, and many, you in particular, Lesha, but also other participants highlighted that we do have the funds that go with the policy documents. And in this specific case, we have issued now these guidelines. We have issued now the new strategy on human rights. The action plan on human rights and democracy has just been published for the next 5 years. And we are working on our programming for the next period. So we can really match the political priorities and the funding. We will then ask our offices on the ground to report on a yearly basis. So we do know what is done in each country, and we pay particular attention on issues on which we have specific policy documents for which we do ourselves an assessment every year to see whether that has been brought forward in the way that we do expect. And so, for instance, there are a number of projects that have taken place, that already implement the guidance. There is one in Gaza on the desalination of water that has given access to water to a large number of the population that did not have water, non-contaminated water. Before. There is one in Sudan to give access to water and sanitation to the migrants from Eritrea. There is one in Burundi. So there are a number of projects that already implement the policies that we have identified here. And we pay particular attention to the implementations. I just would like to underline that it is not only a policy action, it's a policy and implementation at the same time.
Very clear, I think. And I hope from what you're doing and publishing trickles down to other people to inform them and have a look at that. From Ethiopia, we got some very interesting comments on how you manage the local situation. Could you maybe comment on some of the reactions we got on the involvement of women, the role of the women, the role of the youth? In other words, how did you go about involving these different stakeholder groups, and what can we do more to make that happen? Floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lesha. Very good question, actually. In working with community groups, especially, for instance, with utilities, we work with customer forums, which are community representatives that have a link that creates the connection between utility workers and user communities. We were faced by a representative, mainly being elders and men. Even in WASH committee representations, we see women initially because it's usually what NGOs do, but later on you have male-dominated management. So in WaterAid, what we try to understand is do a more deeper understanding of society values and norms. So we used social analysis tools to work on what are the values related to WASH, but generally of that hinder participation, women participation in the development platform, decision making starting from households, and also WASH related safety issues and harassment and sexual risks that women face. So understanding that as an organization and as a team, we make sure that in planning, we ensure that we don't just superficially work on delivering supporting systems, but we are more inclusive, and our staff, which might have their own biases, understand the social interactions, the values, the norms, and we work with communities in a longer engagement on bringing them together, which are the values, what you want to change, and how do you change it. So this requires a long-term dialogue with communities, especially what we call the gatekeepers, the people that don't want things to change, or they want the status quo to remain. So this is a very important in terms of human rights, but also in terms of any development work we have, but this is things that we tend to ignore. But it's very important for NGOs working on WASH to understand gender equality issues and understand norms and values, to work better in changing at the same time, bringing transformative changes in gender and on equality as well as delivering services. Thank you.
I think you made 2 points here, and I would like to stress them because I think it's important for the follow-up. I think one of the things you basically said is a process. It is not like, okay, we put in the provisions or the facility, we make some kind of an arrangement, and then everything will take care of itself. That it's really a process to change behavior, to make people aware of other ways of managing the roles different groups can play. And I think basically there is a problem when you look at financing. Then lots of cases there's financing for the hardware, but not for the really good preparation, and also very little for the follow-up to make sure that these installations still keep working, which is not just a technical issue, but it's also very much a governance issue. So in implementation, that plays a huge role, I think. Pedro, are you still with us? No, I don't think he is. Okay, then I go back to you, Luisa, again. I got a follow-up question.
I am.
Oh, you are, Pedro. Apologies.
Excuse me.
Yes, okay, very good. Because I wanted to ask you if some of the answers you heard from the other panelists actually spoke or answered some of your questions.
Well, yes, of course. There are. I think that the question is not black and white, and we have all kind of perspective. I think agree strongly, of course, with some of the interventions. I think gender mainstream is basic, is essential. Human rights it doesn't mean just to have facilities, but to have a way of behavior around these services. As something open to participation, transparency, and responsibility. And I think gender mainstream is essential, is absolutely essential. And also, I think we must press on the priority of involving the local level. Of course, relationships are between governments, and United Nations address governments and so on. But this question, human rights to safe drinking water and sanitation, these services are managed at the basic level, at grassroots level, at municipal, local level, in many places through community responsibility. So mainstream, local involvement and responsibility, even community approaches has to be very, very important. And I insist, I think we have to change our mind with respect to funding. I don't reject any possibility, but we are not in 2008. We are in another political, economic context. And we are in front of the challenge of facing the global crisis is not anymore a local or a national crisis, is a global crisis. We are more and more conscious of this, so we have to reinforce a new approach under the public responsibilities as the main tool to develop this approach, this human rights-based approach that United Nations is promoting a time ago from the basic principle of leaving no one behind.
Thank you very much. And maybe I can take the liberty of pointing people to a report that was made by your predecessor, a very good report on the elements of gender and women's participation in implementation of the human right to water.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, it was in 2017. I'm not completely sure anymore, but I'm sure it's still online. And it's very educational also for people who are thinking, okay, this sounds good, but how am I doing it? So thank you for that. Luisa, can I go back to you for a last comment, because we're almost at the end of our panel. And one question I got for you was, cannot the EU stress again in your political statements the human right to water, and also ask your partners to do so?
Yes, we are and we will. As I said, the right to water is a political priority. We have had the Council conclusions on water 1.5 years ago, where the right to water was highlighted. So the Council conclusions were not on human rights, but were on water in general as a foreign policy issue. And the right to water was already mentioned there. And we are pushing forward now with the implementation of our new action plan on human rights and democracy, where the right to water and the need to support partner countries in ensuring the right to water and the quality in this context are mentioned in several instances in the first chapter of the action plan. So I would also, and this will be the way we communicate and the way we reaffirm our conviction and our commitment to pursuing this policy.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And Neil, I was going to come to you anyway. I see your, so I think there's two things. One, of course, the comment you wanted to make yourself. And secondly, we got quite a lot of questions about pollution in drinking water. And that the quality also, the quality issue. So maybe you want to comment on those and whatever else you wanted to add to it yourself.
Thanks, Lesha. I was just going to follow up on something Pedro mentioned, which is about, he said that, you know, okay, so it's difficult sometimes to get governments to talk at that level to push forward some of the things we all want. I get that. And quite honestly, I think some of the times that the bottleneck is at governmental level. But there's nothing stopping municipal networks getting together. And I know this is one of Pedro's priorities, and he's very keen to extend this conversation and get municipalities talking to each other and public authorities more who deal with water and sanitation. And I believe that's equally very, very important. I would say, where's WWOPA in all of this? It's time for WWOPA to step up, surely, because the WWOPA is supposed to be this kind of network of operator partnerships, which is so necessary. So it's time, WWOPA, please step up now, I think, and move forward. On pollution, well, I mean, we have enough legislation, certainly in Europe we do, to stop the polluters, and we've got, you know, the Water Framework Directive in place. It's about implementing and penalising stronger, and governments having and regulators having the will to do that. Quite honestly, it happens in some places, but not others. But I think certainly in the EU, we have a legislative framework in place already. Yeah, that's my short answer to that question. I think you're on mute, Lesha.
You are right. I was asking if you can lower your hand so I don't get confused.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Okay, Mariet, some final observations for today. You're muted, Mariet.
Sorry, doing the same silly thing. I was just thinking of a tweet on this, and I really said, I mean, for us anyway, as Women for Water, a huge step forward is involving women, looking at existing policies through a gender lens, and of course thinking involving men, capacity building, mentoring programs to back up structural changes and gender-sensitive policy making and investment. I think those, when that's done, I think we're a leap in front of where we are now.
And what's the tweet you wanted to send?
Sorry?
What is the tweet you wanted to send?
Well, that is, this last bit, to highlight these steps that we have to make.
Okay, thank you. Tseguereda, your last comment or a tweet you want to send?
Okay, thank you very much. I would say as my final comment that it's really critical to play a facilitative role and an enabling role to build systems and also get voices, all the voices from communities, and be able to have accountability as the center, but human rights issues are not necessarily very well understood at the local level. So find ways of making it practical to the local government and get community voices, including that of women, in building the human rights approach and making services accessible to everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
Well, this concludes our panel part, and we're going to give you another opportunity to give your opinion. So if our friends in Brussels can bring up the last of our polls and the link to it, that would be helpful. We have a few questions for you, and let's see what that means. I think this is yes. Okay. So you can still comment on that, I think, or did we close it already? I'm not completely sure about it. No, it's still moving. Okay, that's good. So I think it's very interesting what's happening, because I see a lot involving authorities, operators, users in the programming and in the implementation. And I think that was a strong opinion also came from basically all of our panel participants. I still see it moving. So I think the other one that does get a lot of votes is ensuring the funding from the EU also for water and sanitation, and also smaller scale programming for the communities, so that the money doesn't get stuck at the national level, but actually reaches the grassroots organizations and the organizations working there. And I think another one which is important is ensuring the really participatory approach of the new programming and the new ideas around working on water and sanitation. So having said that, I think we should close the poll now. And all of this will stay available. And I think this is the moment to go to my esteemed colleague, Sophie, who has been following everything that was going on and going to try, I know it's almost an impossible job, but to summarize the main messages and conclusions from everything we got, both from our panelists and from the Q&A and the commenting box. And before I hand over to you, because you will also close the session, I really would like to thank you, Sophie, for our excellent cooperation and all the hard work we did. And I essentially really want to say to all the panelists, thank you for your contributions, and also for the fact that you were so frank in answering our questions, which I think makes it even more interesting. Having said that, Sophie, the floor is completely yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lesha. Thank you to everyone. So yes, it's a difficult task. I'll try my best to reflect this very rich discussion. So it was very rich actually, because we heard from various stakeholders, from EU and UN institutions, private operators, civil society. And it's already great to see that we agreed on a lot of points, actually. We all agreed that delivering the human rights to water and sanitation is really our #1 priority. And we also agree that, as Pedro said, things are not black or white. And we're also speaking of long-term processes. So making change does not happen over the night, especially when we speak of governance and human rights. I think in a way, this session for me was more about partnerships than about governance. I mean, it was really primarily about partnerships and who's best placed actually to support partnership than the new DG international partnership. So it's great that this event was organized by the new DG INFA. So more specifically, we discussed of the following points. First, the EU is developing great instruments. There is really consensus on that. And I think to strengthen the implementation of those instruments in partner countries, it's critical to use political dialogue, but also we spoke a lot about technical assistance, support to UN bodies, and support to local authorities. So that was really a key point today, was really that governance must go also through local authorities, and they need to be supported. Also, clearly, the private sector may not always be the solution that fits all contexts, but it's really clear that we need to engage with the private sector to shape solutions, but also to build national self-reliance and sustainability, and also to build more investors' confidence. Another key point is that accountability in the water sector is very weak. Pedro spoke even of a failure in democratic governance of water. So clearly we need to make sure that rights holders' voices are heard and that we make the best of all mechanisms to get there. Again, capacity development at local level and exchange of good practices is really critical. And private operators play a key role there, as well as the Team Europe approach that could even support more technical assistance. And also this is key. I mean, capacity building and vocational training are really key also to enable women and girls to fully participate in the water sector. So clearly all stakeholders need to support and contribute to sector coordination, accountability, monitoring, etc. And all this, through all those steps, actually, it's really critical to get strong indicators and collect sex disaggregated data. This is something that you've been saying for many, many years, and apparently it's important to still state it again. And so to achieve all this, I think really our partnerships approaches must change. So we really need to move to more transformational partnerships that really enable, empower all the key stakeholders to work towards a shared vision of transforming people's life. And just before giving the floor back to Chris, the moderator of the World Conference, I also really wanted to thank the EU for having showed actually a very strong leadership by hosting this conference. So thank you to the European Commission and to the Slovenian presidency. For me, that's really the first step, but a very important one. And I also wanted to thank all the participants, as well as the technical team and the interpreters. Thank you, and over to you, Chris.